Hey, good morning, all. Welcome to the Common Good Podcast. I'll tell you, it's a Thursday. We talk about science, economics, and goodness here on the Common Good Podcast. And today's December 21st, Winter Solstice Day. So happy solstice, everybody. And if you have friends, that are pagans or otherwise, this is a day to say hello. Don't wait till tomorrow and think I missed Solstice Day with my friends. It's a good day. Shortest sunlight day of the year, longest darkness day, depending on, I guess, how you look at it in the northern hemisphere. And I'm assuming the opposite on the southern hemisphere. Things are just going to get brighter around here, friends. And I'm Doug Pagitt in Minneapolis. We have Robb Ryerse, who's often with us on Tuesdays here. And then we have Frederic. Hi, Frederic. Good to see you.
Good to be here.
Frederic, we often start by talking about the weather, which is a perfect topic for today as we talk about the environment, as we talk about what we can do about it. I live in a place called Minneapolis, Minnesota, the northern part of the United States. We border Canada, middle of the country. Sunny, going to be 42 today and going to be 50 degrees Fahrenheit tomorrow and Saturday. It is supposed to be like 20 degrees right now Fahrenheit. We are 30 degrees above normal. So we can get into all that as we go. But Frederic, how are things where you are?
So I'm in upstate New York, and it's actually quite sunny. A little bit of snow. It's the first snow we got all winter, which is also not what you'd expect. So
how far upstate?
Pretty upstate, Ithaca, New York.
Okay, yeah. Rob, how are things squirreled away outside of Fayetteville, Arkansas?
It's going to be 60 today. And kind of partly, I don't know, partly cloudy, partly sunny. Which is it? When it's partly cloudy, partly sunny, seems like that's two sides of the same coin. I don't know. Have you solved that one, Doug?
Dude, I have been around for whatever reason. I fixate on this stuff.
Dude, something. It doesn't surprise me that you would fixate on that.
Like when people say there's a 40% chance of rain or snow, what that means.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean what people think it means. It means that there's a 100% chance of rain in 40% of the area that they're describing. And when you say that to people, they're like,
what?
No, it can't mean that. It doesn't mean that. And you're like, it means that it's going to rain in 40% of the geographic area on the grid.
Oh, wait a minute.
It's happening already, Frederic. I'm telling you, this is how it goes. It goes.
Are you serious? That's what it means?
Now, and we can walk along a long journey to help people, come to grips with the fact that that's what percentage chance of precipitation.
This feels like a couple weeks.
You've lost half of your audience right there. I mean, people's have just exploded.
This feels like a couple weeks ago when I found out that ponies are not baby horses. Mm-hmm. And I thought pony was a term for a baby horse, like puppy is a term for a dog. And it's apparently that's not the same. Felt like my whole life was a sham. Doug, you just blew my mind.
And it is so complicated for them to get all weather is complicated to predict, but the chance of precipitation, that one particularly difficult because people are like, they're always wrong. It didn't rain. And then the meteorologists or the predictors are like, what we said was it was going to rain in 40% of the area that we were describing. Not there was a 4 out of 10 chance it was going to rain on your head. So anyway, it's not a helpful calculation. But anyway, I hope your skies are sunny. I hope it's a 0% chance of rain or a 100% chance of rain. And it gets easier when you do it like that. If you say 100% chance of rain, then you're like, it's going to rain in the entire area that we're describing. Mm-hmm. Somehow that feels a little cleaner. And then when they say, well, it's a 40% chance, you're like, well, there's a 40% chance it's going to rain everywhere. And they're like, no, we actually mean there's a 100% chance that it's going to rain in 40% of the areas. So you can clearly not drink the wine in front of you from Princess Bride. All right. Well, Frederic, we have more important things to talk about when it has to do with the weather and the sky than how calculations are done on predicting weather precipitation. But that's kind of important. All right. So, Fred, tell us about the week. This is such a curious and wonderful idea to help people engage in response to the environment. So describe what it is: a week where people get together with friends or family or others in their lives. They meet 3 times, watch a documentary film, have a discussion. Like it's such a creative way to think about how you're going to engage on issues of the environment and what people can do about it.
Yeah, I mean, it all started with like, how do we wrap our head around this huge, big topic, right? Like, tons of scientists do stuff about it, but like, what does it mean for me in my life? What will it mean for me, my kids in the next, whatever, 10, 20, 30 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, it's only 4 years ago that me and my wife really grappled with this and really understood the severity and the importance of it. And what came out of it for me and for us was like, hey, like in 10, 20, 30 years, I want to be able to look my kids in the eyes and say, you know what? I didn't avoid the topic. I went straight for it. I looked at it and then I decided, that I was going to do some stuff to try to protect them in their future.
What happened? What was it 4 years ago?
I mean, the background was always there. Like we live in upstate New York. Like, people who grew up here tell us like, there was snow all winter for like 5 months, and now, we barely get like 2, 3 snow episodes, right? We haven't had a single one this winter. So, I mean, it's there in the background. Like we knew that things are changing. And then, you see all these news, articles and stuff and documentaries. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's the same for you or maybe for some people that listen. Like I would read the first few lines and then I would always like, blah, put it away because it feels pretty depressing and it feels overwhelming and it makes me feel sort of small and powerless. And so, I wouldn't really engage with any of it in any form of depth. And then 4 years ago, we had good friends who came to visit for a week and they had children the same age as ours. And we were just so impressed by their willingness to really find out and to go for it and to be temporarily uncomfortable. Because when you look at it, for a while, it feels overwhelming. It really does. But then what they taught us is that you don't get stuck there, right? And so we decided, okay, there was a bit of a pride involved. Like if our friends can look at it, like we can do it, right? Like my wife and I just read everything we could read for a few months and watched all the documentaries we could. And sure enough, it sent us on this journey. We talk about it as sort of a U-shaped journey. So some people talk about it a bit like a grief journey. Like, at first, like there was lots of fear and anger and sadness that came up for us about, wow, shit, like, what's going to happen in the next 20, 30 years for us. I'm still going to be around and our kids is not going to be pleasant. But then luckily you don't get stuck at the bottom of the U. Like for us, we came out on the other side, just lots of clarity about like, okay, if this is the topic, like we haven't chosen it, but if this is a thing, if an asteroid was going to hit the Earth and, imperil my children's future, then I would fight an asteroid. Like it just happens to be, climate change and environmental stuff. Like I'm not an environmentalist at heart. Like that's just not who I am. But like if that's what's gonna, come for us, then let's fight that thing.
What were you before you were an environmentalist? How did you describe yourself?
Yeah, I don't know if I still describe myself as an environmentalist. Like it just happens to be the topic that seems to be coming for us. So
Okay.
that's the one. Hey, I mean, I studied business. I have an MBA. I worked at a large, prestigious consulting firm. I used to have a life where I was flying around in airplanes all the time and stay in hotels and advise large companies and banks and chemical firms. So I guess I'm a business type. Like
Okay.
I still suit and ties and all of those things and PowerPoints and Excels. So that's sort of my background. And I found myself stumbling into this. And so when we went through this journey, we figured like, wow, like we spend so much time watching all these documentaries, reading all these things, and we feel like everybody has a right to know. Like everybody has this right to be able to say in 10, 20, 30 years, like I knew what was happening and I made whatever choices I felt I wanted to make. And so this was during the pandemic. And so we invited some friends to go through a little journey with us. And the way we did it was we invited them 3 nights in a row. It was video calls because it was the pandemic. And anyway, a lot of our friends live all over and not, in upstate New York. And so they joined us for 3 nights, and every night we would share for an hour what we had learned, and then we would invite them to have a conversation about it. An open conversation where we don't tell them what to do, because who am I to tell them what to do? But just, okay, this is where this is heading. This is what scientists say, and so what do you want to do about it? And it worked so well. Like, people were so deeply touched and impressed that they started sharing the recordings of these videos, which to us was like crazy. Like, hear people inviting some other friends saying like, hey, I want you to watch this recording of these 2 people talking to us for an hour. It wasn't very sexy, but it's, already went viral. And so that's when we decided, let's turn it into movies. And so, to answer your question, what does it look like? So if you feel like, okay, I'm sort of like Fred a few years ago, I'm sort of avoiding the topic, but now it feels like time to go look at it. You just get a group together. So it's something you don't do alone, right? Because otherwise you feel alone. So you do it with friends or with family members or with colleagues, or with your faith group, in your church, in your sports club, whatever group it is that is important to you, people that you feel like this would be fun to do it with. You invite them to come together 3 times, every time like an hour and a half. And the first hour, you watch this documentary that we created, that we've sort of very carefully scripted and lovingly produced, and you watch it together. And then we suggest a simple format to discuss with that group. Hey, what showed up for me, when I watched it? Like, how do I make sense of it? Because again, we don't tell people what to do. Like, I don't like people to tell me what I'm supposed to do. And so, when climate scientists tell me like, you should do this or you shouldn't do that, like, I don't like that. So we just lay out, what we've learned, and then people decide for themselves, like, what they want to do with it. And the 3 episodes are written in a way that sort of lead people through that same sort of U-shaped journey that we were in. So episode 1 is quite brutal, to be honest. Like, it just lays it all out there, right? The metaphor we use is, like, we show all the puzzle pieces. Like, one of the reasons that most of us don't engage too much with it, other than it feels overwhelming, is, we take this in bits and pieces, right? Like, hey, there's suddenly this heat dome there, and there's wildfires there, and then, we don't have enough water in California anymore, and and then we have these hurricanes, but it rarely comes together to make like this complete picture, including what will happen to us in the next 30 years, right? And so we don't talk about icebergs melting. We don't talk about, the polar bears, but we talk about like, hey, here in the US where we live, depending on where you live, what will happen, in the next 30 years. And so we just make it very simple, very, conversational, very human, like, that's episode 1. So episode 1, you basically go down the U, right? It's this thing that most of us have been trying to avoid. But we bring it in a very simple fashion, like we're talking to friends, or like we're talking to neighbors. And so, the conversation after episode 1 is often beautiful. Like, people just think about themselves, their kids, what's going to happen. And so we hear from a lot of people who tell us like, I've watched it with a group of friends. We've been friends for 15 years. And this is the deepest conversation we've had because we just slowed down, took the time, and talked about something super essential, which is like, our future and the future we wish for our kids. And so that's, first episode, you watch a 1-hour film, you have a half-hour conversation, and then you can't binge watch. You have to wait 24 hours. It's sort of part of the process. It's like you have to sit with it for at least a day or 2, right? And then episode 2 is sort of the bottom of the U, where we go into like, how did we get into this? And is there hope? Like, what would be the kind of changes we'd need to do individually, but also collectively, to turn this around? So that's episode 2. And so people with episode 2, same thing, 1-hour film, then have a conversation, and they sort of reconnect with possibilities and hope. And then again, you can't binge watch it. And episode 3 gets you sort of back up the U. So for most people, that's the episode that's full of, energy and inspiration. And again, we don't tell people what to do, but we just show like, hey, there's so many we need to shift our energy systems, we need to shift our food systems, and what part do you want to play? What would you enjoy doing? What are you good at? Like,
Mm.
what would be your unique contribution? And so for a lot of people, they tell us like this third episode is a really interesting reframing. Like, so much of the environmental discourse has been sort of a, you know, we have to sacrifice, we have to stop doing things we like, and it's not a
Yeah,
very,
for sure.
appealing. And so we sort of turn this around and say, whether we realize it or not, whether we want it or not, like, this is going to be one of the, if not the defining collective adventure,
Hmm.
for humanity in the next 10, 20, 30 years. And if there's such an adventure, like, where do you want to be? Do you want to stay on the sidelines, or do you want to be part of it? And if
Hmm.
you want to be part of it, what would give you joy? What would make your life richer?
Yeah.
And so for a lot of people, that suddenly unlocks lots of possibilities. And then, these groups of people, these friends, or these, groups of family, or, with their faith group, they suddenly decide together, like, hey, let's do this. This would be fun. Let's,
Yeah. Fred, I'm curious that you have kind of brought together two things that actually bring about change in people's lives.
Hmm.
What's really interesting, I remember um, uh, um, Doug said once that um, i- if someone has changed, if someone's going through some kind of significant change in their life, it's most likely because they've seen a documentary. And
Yeah.
there's something about that medium that helps people think differently about things. That, coupled with a group of people, a community, a group of friends, um, like that seems like a really powerful combination. And I'm curious, like, what that was like in terms of kind of thinking about, okay, we're going to turn these Zoom calls into documentaries, and then we're going to like try to get people to facilitate, groups of, folks watching them together. Like, where did that idea come from?
So the idea to do it in groups really came from Ellen, my wife. So this is a joint project that the both of us did,
Mm.
and she had this idea of, like, let's just say you can't do this. You can't do this alone. You have to do it as a group. And at first, I thought, like, wow, that's a big constraint. My idea was like, okay, let's have sort of this 3 episodes. Let's help people go through this U-shaped journey that we went through. Um, and yeah, and she was so right to say, like, no, let's do it as groups, because the risk otherwise, that I've seen this with documentaries, like, I see a documentary and I've been super touched.
Yeah.
There's something in me that is stirring, but if my wife or my friends or my family or my colleagues haven't seen it,
Hmm. Hmm.
then suddenly I feel sort of like, I've gone through this thing, but they have no idea. And especially if I want to change something in my life
Hmm.
about this, and they don't see this, like, I mean, it happens all the time. Like, you want to make some change, and the people around you go, like, what happened to you? Like,
Hmm.
I don't
Hmm.
recognize you. Like, I want the old version of you back,
Yeah.
right? And they want to, hold you back. And so the same thing happens. In the films, we filmed 9 wonderful,
Yeah.
amazing, sort of ordinary heroes, right?
Yeah.
We chose
I
to
was,
film
yeah.
ordinary people.
Yeah, I was gonna say I wanted to let folks know that it's not just your and Helene's journey,
Yeah,
but it tells the story of people that are engaged and involved.
yeah. And so they're ordinary, people who've had the courage to really face what's coming, and decided, that they would do something about it. And each one, decided for their own what it would be. And I remember one person, Yancey, who worked in the oil industry, and he was just shocked by the number of spills, and what they were asked to do, and at some point it made no sense. And he's a yeah, he's a deeply religious person, so he really prayed with, on this with his wife, to decide to discern. And he made a segue to a whole different, he brought now his skills to electric car industry, and but what is so beautiful is like he had the support of his wife, right? But so many other people, if they don't understand what he went through, would have said like, "You've got an amazing job, in the oil industry. You make lots of money. Are you crazy? What's happened to you?" Like, right? We need the people around us to go on a similar journey
Hmm.
so that we all understand the same things, and then we might make different decisions, but we understand where we're coming from, right? And I'm sure if Yancey didn't have his wife that fought, it would have been so much harder. So we need companionship in these journeys whenever we
Hmm.
change.
Yeah, for sure. And Fred, look, it's really brilliant to get people together into shared thought, especially like doing it 3 days subsequently, or in a row, or 3 days in a week, something like that. It's really smart because it lets people ruminate, on it. I love it.
And people are
What?
looking forward. Like we've even had groups. I mean, we tell people it should be a group that right? Your friends, family, colleagues,
Sure.
whatever.
Right.
But sometimes we've had groups for some reason where people assembled friends who didn't know each other, right? Imagine, Doug, you assemble a number of friends who don't know each other, and like after episode one, like people are so looking forward to meeting again for episode 2 and 3. Like
Yeah.
something quite deep
Right.
happens, and we know that uh, more than 50% of the groups decide to keep meeting at
Right on.
least a fourth time afterwards. So people have had something, just these profound, beautiful conversations where you show up real, where you figure out, where nobody tells you what to do, and people just want to keep staying in that space.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine it fills a lot of needs for people. Some of it might be specific topic to the environment and what they can do in response. Some of it's just also people want to have interesting conversations with smart people about things that matter. And
Oh,
we're void of that in our society. I mean, a lot
exactly.
of us do go to places and do things just to get a little taste of, can I
Mhm.
just be in a significant interaction with someone about something?
Yeah.
You take almost anything, it doesn't matter. It's like why
Yeah.
people are in book clubs. They're like, it's never about the book. Sometimes it's about the wine, but it's
Mhm.
usually just about talking to somebody about something that matters, that's not just the typical how was your day, and how do they calculate the precipitation chances. Like they want something more consequential than that. So
Doug, that
I
was
think it's
interesting. Don't beat yourself up.
yeah, I I think it's brilliant. How many of these people are doing it like you did in your original run through, where they're doing it on Zoom or something, versus they're gathering together in someone's shared, in a house in the shared space?
Both can be done. 40% of the groups are doing it online, on some video conferencing platform, and 60% are doing it, in
Okay.
person.
You don't see any real difference in
No,
so
it was
far about how connected people feel or anything?
no, that was surprising and encouraging for us. Like I thought, like, if you're in person, obviously, like that's gonna feel like even more like a bonding experience. But actually,
Yeah, it depends on the person. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
Especially introverts. A lot of introverts, and their anxiety just goes through the roof when they're in a
Yeah.
room and they're watching the dynamics happen. They're like, oh
Yeah.
my gosh. And,
Mhm.
Yeah.
it's a lot of social pressure. So, yeah, the Zoom can be a real
Yeah.
safety place for a lot of people.
Fred, in the US, talking about the climate has become a very difficult and polarizing conversation. It's
Yeah.
become almost political that like, you don't talk about religion, you don't talk about politics. I mean, we break those rules here at Vote Common Good all the time. That's kind of what we're all about. But there is kind of that thing of like, okay, I don't want to talk about like when I'm going home for Christmas. There's a few things I don't want to talk about Donald Trump. I don't want to talk about Hunter Biden. I don't want to talk about climate change. Like
Mhm.
there's some things that people feel like can be very divisive.
Mhm.
How do you tackle that? How do you well, like what's your approach with that?
Yeah. Um, Maybe before I go straight to your question, it was interesting to me when you look at surveys, um, and you look more specifically, to you know, Democrats, liberals tend to you know think that obviously climate change is happening, and it's on the conservative side, that some people feel more awkward about this conversation. But what is interesting is when you look at surveys, it all depends on how you ask the question. So if you ask the question in a non-political way, in something that doesn't trigger your identity, right? It doesn't trigger you like I'm a conservative, I'm a Republican. Then people on the conservative side, just like people on
Mhm.
on the more liberal side, are really concerned, right? They see the thing happening. right? I mean, yeah, here in upstate New York, there used to be, 2 foot of snow the whole winter, and it no longer is, right? Somebody the other day who lives in Long Island tells me that when he was a kid, trucks would drive across the ice from Long Island on the ocean to Fire Island, right? Like
Yeah.
unthinkable today. So people see this, people are concerned, right? So if you ask it in a non-political way, lots of conservatives are really concerned. As soon as you ask the same question, but you phrase it in some way that sounds political, right? That touches your identity, suddenly people feel like they have to say, oh, it's not happening, or maybe it's happening, but it's human, it's not human,
Hmm. Hmm.
whatever it is. And so um, my advice would be bring it in the same way, bring it in a non-political way, which is what we've done with a week, by the way, right? Like the whole way we talk about this is we just leave politics aside. Like, this is about us, our children. Like I'm like, so I believe that climate change is happening. We see it. I believe that we need to take a lot of actions, but let's imagine that I'm wrong, right? Um, in worst case, in 30 years, what will my kids say? Oh, you were wrong about this thing. But imagine I'm, I'm denying this thing and it's really happening.
Hmm.
I mean, what your kids will tell you is like, what? For
Yeah.
your, party affiliation,
Yeah.
you decided to ignore the science and
Yeah.
so,
There's a
so
Pascal's wager kind of thing to it. Yeah.
Yeah, Fred, I want to ask you. So a lot of people don't have a problem with the first two movements in the U. It seems to me that you've described, right? They look, they see, they recognize things. They got it.
yeah,
They
yeah,
see that there's a scenario. The issue comes in what is someone supposed to do, and
yeah,
that's where it gets political. So they're like, "Hey, I understand this is happening, but don't take my gas, running automobile. Don't tell me about my gas stoves. Don't tell me about my light bulbs." Yada yada. So the response side, or people saying like governments doing carbon buy-offs and just paying another country so they can pollute on their behalf, and that's not good enough. It's almost always the response to the dilemma, not the dilemma. And
yeah,
and when people are like, well, just don't get to the response, of course nobody wants to. So I want your response to that, and then also to this. There's a very deep sense that I have that there are some crises that cannot be solved by individual personal responses.
mhm,
That's not how we got them.
yeah,
We didn't get them by human behavior and choices of food
liberals.
foods that we bought, or which so many, like, whether I recycle my cans is something I'm going to do, but that's not the solution because that wasn't the problem. There
Yeah,
might be really good reasons why we do that. It keeps people alive and awake, and I think it's a really good practice, all this. But it's not the solution. How do you I mean, it feels a bit like when I hear these conversations with people about like when you meet with somebody who works in hospice care and they're like, here's what I know in hospice care. Every one of us is going to die. You don't want to look at it, but you will.
yeah.
Chances are in 30 years, and if not 30, then 40, and if not 40, then 50, and if not 50, then 100, you're going to be dead. And you're not dealing with it. You're walking around in your life, right? And you should deal with it. And you should maybe make arrangements for it. You should maybe prepare for it. Don't let your kids run into you just dying and then your stuff is a mess and you didn't do anything. But that existential crisis is something human beings choose to avoid
Yeah,
consistently. So it feels like when people get to the dire, what should we do 30 years, they're like, well, it's inevitable, or there's nothing I can really do about it. This is at a higher pay level, or the
yeah,
things you're asking me to do at some point, they just feel, like sure, I could go work out and I will and I should, but that's because I want a better life, not because I want to add a day.
yeah,
So do you see what I'm getting at? I know a lot of people who just struggle not with the down move and not with the grief, but
yeah.
with the what are we supposed to do about this? And if I start telling myself that I become the hero in this crisis story, I don't know that that really feels honest to what I should be doing. So anyway, all of that. You've obviously thought about all this, and I'm interested in how you deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, in the third episode, when we go up to you, we share what these 9 people that we filmed, like, what they decided to do. And very quickly we sort of populate that thing with like lots of things you can do, right? And so we quickly overcome this idea of what could I do? Don't even know where to start, like other than recycling or changing light bulbs, to like there's tons of things you can do, right? There's things you can do at home, in your home, and there's like a whole list. There's things that you can do in the communities you're part of. There's things you can do in your workplace. If you have, that's often a place where like, if you want to avoid a bit of plastic or whatever you want to do, or, save some energy at home, that's great. But like in your workplace, you can do that times 500. Like, if you start initiating a project and it's fun and to do it with colleagues. And then there's things you can do in sort of the wider community and activism, and then there's obviously influencing what governance and politics can do. So there's very quickly we established like, hey, there's tons of things you can do, and then within that, what would sound like me, like what would be fun, like what am I good at, like and one of the things that I found striking as when we got deeper into this over the last 4 years is we met so many interesting people, and none of them would want to go back to before they had really dealt with it.
Oh.
And before they got active, right? In some ways, they feel like their lives got richer. Like they've met interesting people. They do stuff that feels meaningful. Like if they're more introverts, they do stuff on their own, research stuff, and they've insulated their own home because they're introverts. If they're extroverts, they found their gang, they found their group with whom they're doing interesting things. And so, yeah, I can just invite you, like, go do the week and then see in episode 3 everything that shows up.
Great.
Because yeah, among all these things, there will be something that will be fun for you.
Yeah, but okay, I love it. And look, all the things we can do to be more humanly engaged and flourish better as humanity is important. Often in environmental conversations, though, the thing that drives a lot of people to it is they want to solve the problem. Yeah. How do you deal with that question for people who are like, I'm looking at this and I am not going to be satisfied with like, hey, I met some good people and I learned a few things and nothing changed in 30
and now
years. Like maybe I got it off my back and my kids are going to say like, well, grandpa worked hard, but nothing actually changed. Like I don't just want to do reputation protection. I want to change the environment. You know what I'm getting at? Like those people who do that, how do you deal with both of those impulses or both of those realities?
I mean, I'm not struggling, but like they show up in my own life. Like, is what I'm doing, is it enough? And one thing that I understood at some point is I think I've just watched too many superhero movies. I've read too many Harry Potter books to my kids. And I think collectively we've sort of been brainwashed with this idea that when there's a crisis, there is the one person, the chosen one, right? Or the person with the superpowers who will save the day for everyone else, right? And obviously I'm not the chosen one. I don't have superpowers. Like there's, this crisis is so big, I won't save it. And so there's part of me that just goes like, well, shit, if I won't save it, then I might just as well not do anything, right? And obviously that's not how the world works, right? Like if you look at any major historic change, right? Like if you look at, how do we get from thinking that a king should rule us, or that the most stupid son of the king should rule us, to the idea of democracy? Like, it wasn't because there was a superhero or a chosen one who imposed it. It was because sufficient number of people stopped believing that old story of, of feudalism and the king and wanted something else, right? And so it's the same, like if ever we're gonna get out of this mess, it's because enough people do enough things. And so I just need to do something that feels big enough for me. Like I don't want to just like say no to plastic straws or recycle. Like I want to do meaningful stuff, and for me it's the week, right? For some people it's like something they will do in their workplace, or get solar panels on the roof of your church, or get whatever it is. Like for you, get stuff that feels big enough, that feels meaningful for you, and trust that there's millions of other people who work on something else. Like I don't need to work on electric cars, somebody else, like there's tons of people doing that. I don't need to work on insulating homes, tons of people doing that, right? I don't need to work on shifting our food, agricultural systems to more regenerative systems. Like people are working on changing the farm bills. Like that's one of the things that's exciting. Like once you get into this, you suddenly see like, hey, there's actually these millions of people who are working on this. I had no idea. Like, But
Does that ever depress you when you're like, hey, we've had Earth Day as an official recognized day for more than 50 years in this country.
yeah,
People have been on it. We have so many efforts to try to deal with it. And yet, and look, I get that, like, when you talk about the environment, that's a big category, from
yeah,
air pollution to water to mercury levels in fish, because there's no safe fish to eat anywhere in the world because mercury loads. There's contamination. None of that has to do with climate change, right? Those are separate issues from climate change. So a lot of people can't really figure out, like, hey, if I'm gonna do I rip the label off my cans before I put them in recycling? That
yeah,
may not have anything to do with carbon dioxide loads in the environment that's causing, you know,
yeah.
gas buildup. So, like, how do you help people, or do you not? Do you sort of deal with in the program itself, when it's a broad range of environmental issues, really
Which
different than climate change, particularly when it comes to the heating of the air and the water, on the planet and so on.
Yeah, and by the way, we don't talk only about climate change, right? Like, episode 1, we talk about all of these different things. We talk about, like, how life is collapsing, and how pollution is everywhere. And so we take sort of this broad look at
Right.
things, basically like how we're sort of mistreating creation, right? That's sort of like the broader perspective we take. Yeah, I mean, sometimes I feel like I'm hopeful and I feel like we can turn this around. And there's other times where I feel like, shit, this isn't moving fast enough. Then I choose to ground myself in the things where we've made real progress. Like, I mean, like air pollution, we've made real progress. It's
Yeah.
still bad, but we've made huge progress. Like, there's hundreds of thousands of people who would have died, actually millions of people who would have died if we hadn't taken some really important legislations in the
Mm-hmm.
70s. The water is much better in a lot of places. And so it's important to, like, if you look at
Totally.
if you look at renewable energies, I mean, they're now cheaper than coal. They're cheaper than gas and oil in many
Mm-hmm.
places, and they will get much cheaper, right? So our electricity bills will go down. I mean, so it's a miracle of technology what's happened there. So I choose to ground myself in the things that are positive while not avoiding, like,
Yeah.
the things that are negative. But like, I think it's important to keep looking at the things where we're making real progress.
Yeah.
I have a friend who's big in the environmental movement, and he taught me this concept. He said, look, when it comes to the environment, it's one of the issues that's not a problem to be solved. He
Mhm.
says problems have solutions, and you just execute the solution. And we have a lot of problems. The environment is a predicament, meaning it's a grand dilemma that requires multiple responses multiple kinds of responses over time. That's a different way to sort of orient someone. And a lot of people come into crises, social crises or whatever, with problem solution mentality. And he's like, you have to come with predicament response.
I agree.
Is that, do you find that to be true? And is that part of what you're trying to do, is give people a different frame for how to think about what they do in light of all this when they, I
Yeah.
get it. Different personalities are different on this, but
And again, I just want to stress, like, all we do is sort of an invitation.
hmm.
We don't tell people what to think. We don't tell people what to do, because, like, who am I? Like, I'm Fred Laloux. Like, you hadn't heard of me, 10 minutes ago. Like, why would I be, So, um, it's very much like the week is something that's done by ordinary people for other ordinary people. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we've grappled with this. It felt really meaningful. We want to help other people grapple with this. And so, yeah, we don't tell people what to think. We don't tell people what to do. I
Yeah.
remember, like, early on when we had these, these before we even had the films, like, there was one friend who had invited his dad to watch it, and his dad was sort of, climate change is not real, sort of, very sort of, and he had his arms crossed the whole, 3 episodes, right? And he just was there because his son had invited him.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the third episode, he finally sort of uncrossed his arms, and he said, this was really good, and I finally trust them.
Yeah.
And he said, I trust them they trusted them at the moment where they said, we don't know what you should do. Like, I was always waiting for what is sort of their hidden agenda.
Yeah.
Like, where do they want to lead me? Like, what do they want me to do? And when they finally told me at the end, like, yeah, you figure out how you want to respond. And
Yeah.
he finally like, okay, this is for real. Like, they don't want to manipulate me.
Yep.
So we can only share from our own experience that this has felt meaningful. That we are now like on the other side, like so many people who say, I would never want to go back, even though looking at some of this was actually painful,
Mm-hmm.
but I never want to go back. And I've just met so many cool and interesting people. And even
Mm-hmm.
though I won't be able, like you say, it's not a problem to be solved. And certainly I won't be able to solve it on my own. But the feeling that I'm doing my part, the feeling, it's even like small things. And for everybody, it's going to be different. I can just share for myself, like when I'm walking through nature now, like I have a different
Mm.
appreciation. Like I just know the beauty of it and the preciousness of it and the sacredness of it in a way that I didn't when I just took it for granted.
Mm.
Like the idea, like, yeah, where I live, like, the snow has already disappeared. It's going to be so much hotter. Like the weather where I live in upstate New York will, in 30 years, that's what people predict, look pretty much like Washington, D.C. now. It will be humid and mosquitoes and no more snow. And so a lot of the nature that I love around here will disappear, will be replaced by something else. So now I have just a sense of preciousness.
Mm.
And so yeah, so for everybody, this is going to be a different journey, something else
Mm-hmm.
different
Mm-hmm.
is gonna show up.
Mm.
Yeah. Fred, let's talk about distribution for a minute. Like how like if what's the approach in terms of like, someone who might be interested in watching? Like is it on Netflix? Like how do you do this? And what and like come on, what's the like you mentioned the hidden agenda. What is the hidden agenda? Like what like come on, this is gonna like what
I mean, I can
what's
tell you,
the
there's no hidden
what's the cost? What's
agenda.
the like,
Okay,
you know.
okay. I mean, there's no hidden agenda. I can tell you what our hope is. We put 3 years of our lives into making these films, and so obviously our hope is that lots and lots of people will be inspired to do this, for two reasons. I mean, just for themselves, because I think it's such a beautiful, meaningful experience, and for them to be able to say to their kids, like, I have no regrets. And then more broadly, like I think that if we have a chance to turn this around, it's because millions of people change their workplace from within, do stuff in their community that's cool. And so yeah, we hope obviously that millions of people can watch this. It's not on Netflix. Yeah, you're just showing this page, like, organizing the session is easy, so it's not on Netflix. You just need to go to the website of the week, so it's theweek.oo. The reason it's not on Netflix or any of the streaming platforms is because the whole magic of it is that you can't watch it alone, that you do it
Mm.
with a group, that there's a conversation afterwards, that which on Netflix wouldn't happen. So
Yeah.
during the week, it's free if you do it at home or with friends or with family or with your faith group or whatever it is. There's a really low cost of $20 per participant if you do it in the workplace. So workplaces have to pay a fee. The reason we do that is, all the films were, the production was paid for by donations. So, we're a nonprofit. But,
Mm-hmm.
going, asking rich people to give you money is exhausting. And so we hope that, if enough people watch it inside workplaces, and it's starting to happen, like 40% of the sessions happen in workplaces. So there's large
Oh.
workplaces that will roll it out as a training program. And so hopefully that will generate enough revenue to pay for the small staff that we now have in our nonprofit to help distribute it. So again, free if you do it at home. Donation is very much encouraged at the end, and then and $20 inside the workplace. And the way most people do it is that they assemble a first group, sort of test it out. It takes a bit of a, you take like a little bit of a social risk the first time you do it, right? Like you invite
Sure.
friends who haven't seen it, and you go like, okay, apparently this thing is really cool, so let's do it. Now, really, I mean, the response we get is just amazing. So, I don't think you're actually taking much risk, but like the first time you don't know.
Fred, I
And
can imagine 2 levels of risk in the people I will invite. I'm going to do one of these myself. I think this is brilliant. Um, one of those are people that are like, oh, I'm not interested in this stuff. This is kind of a bunch of fooey hooey, or
yeah,
it's all dire. The other are people who are like, okay, the first thing we're going to do is talk to all of our neighbors and get them to stop watering their lawns. And the second thing we're going to do is we're going to make sure that the cans are collected. And the third thing we're going to do is make sure that when somebody's painting a house that they don't use this kind of paint. Like they just kick in immediately to the, I've been thinking about this a long time and I didn't need this documentary and here I go, right? That energy.
Yeah.
Um, do you give tips and help to hosts like me that have this worry that like the people who will say yes to this are people who care about the environment? And a lot of those people in my life, they do have an agenda about what you should do. And they're not going to let any group of people that are sitting in a room talking about this leave without knowing the three things they should do. Or tell me that I can't have an Amazon delivery at my house again because the social shame is through the roof. You see what I'm getting at?
I'm totally getting it. Let's talk about let's talk
How do you
about
help a host
yeah,
feel good about how this is going to go down?
yeah. So let me talk about the both extremes that you talked about, right? So the people who normally like go like, not interested, don't want to do this, right? If it's like if you want to invite them because they're important, they're meaningful. We have lots of people who say like, hey, I invited my parents, they're not into this, but it was important for me for them, to understand me, right? Like something that was important to me is that the advice we give them is to say, hey, please join this thing. I know this might not be something that you would choose to do, but it's really important. And so if you want to understand where I'm at,
Nice.
if our relationship matters, like, and again, trust me, this is not something, I have no expectations, I don't want you to do necessarily something at the end, it's just for you to understand where I'm coming from. And so suddenly sort of the shoulders drop, people go like, okay, that's okay, I can do that, because you matter to me. So that's one extreme. The other extreme, the people who are already like gung-ho, right? We tell them like, you're not the target audience, right? Like you're already like deep into this, right? So for you it's probably not going to be something very new, but you might find it interesting as something that you might use with those family and friends and colleagues who you've been trying to convince. And the more you try to convince them, the more they push back. And then generally by that time, people like smile and laugh because they recognize themselves. Like, they've been just pushing too hard and they've noticed like it's not working. So they're frustrated, right? And one of the reasons that they are so adamant is they're frustrated. They've tried to get people to care and they haven't managed to, And so we introduced the week as like, hey, here's a tool, watch it with me. And I think you might find it an interesting tool to then share it with those people you've been trying to convince where it hasn't worked. Because then the week sort of does the work for you. You no longer have to convince them. You just need to invite them. And then let the thing do it, sort of its magic. And I think the tone that we use in the week is simply the tone that I like, which is like no blame, no shame, no telling people what to do. And so I think people get it. Like when they've watched it, even though before that they were into the shaming piece, like they've sort of rubbed off on them, I think.
I like that. No blame, no shame. The website also has no polar bears. Can you say why that's important and what you're getting at with that little phrase there? This is not, with a polar bear with an X through it.
It was just very important to me. Like one thing that was frustrating. So when my wife and I 4 years ago decided we really wanted to find out what's going to happen, and maybe this will reflect badly on me, but like, to be honest, I wasn't so interested in icebergs melting and polar bears. I mean, I do care about polar bears, but like I've never met one in my life. But I really do care about my kids, right? And I really do care about my friends. And so what I wanted to find out was like, what is going to freaking happen to me and my kids where I live? And it wasn't that easy to find. Like, honestly, like a lot of the literature that's out there, talks about icebergs melting and sea levels rising and, but like where I live and me and my kids. And so that's, it took us a lot of time to actually find that information. I mean, obviously lots of scientists have looked at it, but we had to find that information. And just this example that I gave you, like, for instance, like there's this team of scientists that looked at every major city around the world, including, all the major cities in the US. And they looked at, okay, what is that weather going to be like in 30 years from now? Right? And what is the closest city today that has the same weather as that city? Right? And so, Boston, the weather in 30 years is going to be like the weather in Charlotte.
Right. We get Kansas City here. And a lot of people truly, and I'm not even being facetious about this, people are like, I could totally go with Kansas City weather in the Minneapolis environment. I would take it in a minute. Like there's
Yeah.
this weird thing with climate change with that weather predictor thing. People are like, "Ooh, that sounds a more mild winter sounds terrific."
Yeah, and then you get places like, San Diego that are going to end up in Somalia, right? Or that are
Yeah,
going to end up, like, the closest city they found was in Somalia or was in Pakistan, and
yeah,
so it's suddenly
yep.
like, all of the U.S. drifts southward, but then some bits just completely,
They just get washed
and
out. Yeah, mhm.
anyway, so the whole polar bear thing was like, I wanted to find out, like, what
Yeah,
is going to happen to us, like what are the places, I've now realized, like, in 30 years we know that there's places in the US that are going to become unlivable, that are going
mm,
to be uninsurable, like, some people
sure.
know this
Yeah,
or don't know this, like in California a few months ago, like the number one and number three insurance companies in California stopped offering coverage in the whole of California. They're just pulling out of
yeah,
California.
yeah.
And
Florida
so,
as well. Yeah,
this is the beginning of, like, hey, when insurance companies pull out, that means that, banks no longer offer mortgages. If banks no longer offer mortgages, like, the price
right.
of the assets that you've accumulated just collapses,
Yeah, and
taxes.
huge decisions about why millions of people are moving to deserts when
Exactly.
there's not enough water. Like this
Yeah.
is the implication of a lot of these decisions have to do with things like you're discussing, like the
And
business
so,
implications that go to make it possible for people to live in the middle of deserts. You
exactly.
know,
And so
Arizona,
people like
California, Nevada.
Doug in Minneapolis, or, and me in upstate New York, like, we're going to be the places where millions of people will move to.
Too. Yep.
Right. So when you say, like, hey, weather here is going to be like Washington D.C., oh, well, maybe that's not too bad, and it's not too bad. That's why millions of people will move here, because they will have to move away from
Yeah.
other places. But then, what does that mean, here for, for us, for our economy?
Hey Fred, I'm sure because you're good at this. This website is terrific. People care about it. That as people pay attention, you're getting a lot of opinions. I imagine you're getting opinions from people who are big into environmental response uh,
Mhm.
things, scientists, climate scientists, activists, and others. Are you running into any people who are like, "Hey, thanks for trying, but we need you, or would want you, or you really should say this, do this"? How is that going? And do you feel that pressure from the people who have been in this for a long time? And they might say to you, as they do to me and a lot of things I'm into, like the zeal of the newly converted is really great,
Yeah.
but those of us that have been around, we want to tell you how this works around here, and it goes a little something like this.
Yeah, yeah,
How do you?
we've had our fair share of that. I mean, mostly people are really positive and they get it, but, like, sometimes people have been in the space for 30 years
Hmm.
and they want us to tell the most advanced story that they are, like, into. Like, if you really look at it, like, we will need more nuclear power and you should say that. Or we're
Hmm.
like, hey, we have 3 times 1 hour, like, we can't go into, like, there's a, one part, but then there's also, like, some of them that are the purists. Like, you talk about electric cars, but it should only be public transport because electric cars is not the solution. And I go, like, yeah, maybe, but, like, people, like, who live rurally like me, we will still need a car. So, it's better if it's electric than if it's, so yeah, we get our fair share of people like, actually, you haven't talked about, like,
Yeah.
the heart of this is the monetary system, the debt, the interest bearing monetary system that pushes us to ever more growth. And, like, and we go, like, okay, we get it. Like,
Right.
that's really important to you. But yeah.
Yeah. It's an illustration of it being a dilemma and not a problem, right? Like it.
Yeah.
It implicates all of this. It really does
Yeah.
implicate it. And it seems like you also have, and I appreciate this, but I imagine some other people don't, a human centric view of environment and climate change. What is the impact on human beings? There's a lot of people in the environmental movement that will say, like, look, the earth is not going to go away. The earth will be here. It was here in a ice age. It was
Mm.
here when there were dinosaurs. The earth is going to be here, but human beings are not going to flourish. Alligators might, but not human beings. But that's a particular view. That's a very human centric view of the environment.
Yeah.
Are you deliberate about that? And do you want people to sort of know that part of this when they get into it, or do you have thoughts about any of that?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Like, in the environmental movement, there is this part of the movement that is starting to sort of hate humanity.
Hmm.
right? Like, if we weren't there, like all these problems would be solved,
Yes.
like, and I don't subscribe to that. I mean, yes, we've taken over the planet, and in the process, we've done lots of damage. And um, but I was very touched. There's this young Native American activist, Lila June Johnson, and she talks about humans as a keystone species. Keystone
Yeah.
species are these species that really, you know, determine their environment, like wolves in Yellowstone, or grizzly
Mm.
bears, or like, if you take them out, the whole thing changes and unravels. Like they're needed as a keystone species, and we've become these keystone species. We've just not
Mm.
used that power very well, but actually we can use that power amazingly well. And there's so many beautiful stories, and we might not have time for that, but like, oh, I just have chills just mentioning that. Like, you have these farms that were sort of traditionally farmed, with monocultures and pesticides, and life just collapses. So we play our role as keystone species kind of badly in that thing, but use other agricultural practices, which, by the way, are better for farmers. Like, it takes a little bit of figuring out because the whole financial system is stacked against you. But like, you no longer need to deal with these pesticides that, are
Yeah.
not good for farmers' health, etc. And like life rebounds. I mean, you have just the most amazing, ecosystem. Like, and nature rebounds so quickly. Like, that's one of the things we've learned recently. Like in 10 years, like a farm that was farmed traditionally, like, I mean, you just have an explosion of life, right? And so we can use our role as keystone species to very quickly, like when we
Yeah.
decide that we're going to protect 30% of the oceans, like within 10 years, like these 30%, I mean, life just completely rebounds, right? And so I don't have that hating image of
Yeah.
humans, but I also think that we need to be aware that we are keystone species, right? Like, I remember there's this one statistics that maybe I shouldn't give it away because it's in episode 1, but like, um,
No one will
you know,
remember.
we're not too heavy on statistics. I mean, all of the science that we present is really solid, and we had like a scientific committee, like, vet everything we did. But we were trying to look for these illustrations that hit home on me, like, more than any sort of just data and facts. And there's like this one tidbit: if you take the weight of all human beings, okay, imagine we were, put all human beings on a scale, like, the 8 billion of us, and then you take the weight of all of our livestock, right? All of our vertebrate livestock, right? And so the cows and the chickens, and right. And then on the other side of the scale, you would put all of wildlife, right? All of vertebrate wildlife, like all of the bears and what have you, right? And then you would compare the weight, like, what do you think? How do these two compare?
Mm.
Well, it looks like humans and our livestock are now 96% of the weight.
Mm.
All of the other, wildlife is down to 4%. Like, so we have to be like, when I heard that, like, I realized, like,
Yeah.
freaking, I mean, we're dominating this place, right? That
Yeah.
we're just dominating this place. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
another tip that didn't make it into the films, I'm just going to say it. I don't know, Rob, if you came across this thing, like, if you take all of the weight of the human generated stuff, so our asphalt, our buildings, our plastic, our, if you take the weight of all human made stuff, it's more than the weight of all living things,
Mm.
of all trees, of all living soil. I mean, that's, so it's human centric in a sense. Like, yeah, let's realize like how much we've taken over.
Mm.
And let's also realize like how quickly we could change things for the better. Because if we partner with nature, nature just rebounds so quickly, and it's
Yeah.
beautiful.
I'm sure you saw it, that film that Apple put out with the with National Geographic of what happened during the pandemic.
Yeah,
Have you seen that one where
I haven't seen
they?
it. No, I heard about it. I still have to see it.
It's
Yeah.
amazing that what they. I mean, a bunch of photographers and videographers of nature, when the pandemic hit, realized, hey, we're shutting the planet down. Let's go see what happens. So they set cameras all over and recording devices in the oceans, and within weeks, animals were coming back into cities, and dolphins and whales were communicating in tones and patterns, that songs that they hadn't used before because the ships affected them. And like within a year, that there was somebody in, I think it was in India, who had tears in his eyes because he said he saw the mountain that he knew was there, but pollution had covered it and he had never seen it in his life.
Wow.
To your point that this, now granted, a global, commerce shutdown of 70% is a big deal,
Yeah.
but the planet wants to heal, like it is an extraordinarily moving visual experience to sort of watch it. And it's as you put so well, it's conflicted as both heart inspiring and heart sinking, because we know that it just, we just went right back to it.
Yeah. Hey, Fred, just say again, if somebody's interested in checking out the week,
Yeah.
maybe, family's going to be around, this coming week and, for the holidays, and you want to, do something meaningful, or, thinking about maybe a church group, a small group at your church, or even thinking about talking with the, the HR department at your work, and, like, hey, how, if somebody's interested in doing this, what do they do? Where do they go? How does that work?
So they just go to. Oh, sorry. Did you hear that? Somebody's.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Sorry.
I thought this was part of your answer. It's going to be
Yeah.
a little rumba.
Musical interlude.
Yeah, we're gonna. Well, you start dancing. First thing you do, you play this beat and you dance to it.
So the first thing you do is you just go to the website, theweek.oo, and you just say like, okay, register my group. You just go there. You say like, okay, it's a group of whatever, 4 people, 8 people, 10 people, whatever it is. And so you sign up for your session, and then you say if it's an online group or an in-person group, and then we will send you the links. So the link to episode 1, and then you land on a page. I don't know if you can show it here. That's really simple, really well done. Said like step 1, welcome everyone, and then step 2, watch the film together. Step 3, take a 1-minute break, if you want to, and step 4, here's the conversation starter. The thing is, we try to make it as easy as possible. So as an organizer, like you just receive an email that explains all that. The thing is self-explanatory. So, it's super easy. And especially for the conversation part, like we don't expect the organizer to facilitate things in any particular way. So we set things up. That was really important for us. Rather than giving like the organizer, say, a PDF that says like, okay, this is what we suggest you do. And then, you have to look at the, what am I supposed to do? And you look awkward in front of people.
Yeah.
We have an initial little video that everybody watches together that just says like, okay, time for the conversation. Here's a question that we suggest you reflect on and share about. And here's a format that we suggest. And so as an organizer, you're just a participant like any other. So you're not expected to sort of lead that conversation. And we offer some ground rules of like, hey, everybody speaks in turn, no interruptions. If you can, speak from the heart, don't make this sort of some political, intellectual debate. And all of that sort of helps to ground these conversations in a way that makes them pretty simple. So that was really important for us. So if you're an organizer, like don't feel like you have any pressure. Like everything is pretty self-explanatory.
Oh, it's beautiful.
And again, it's free of charge. Mm-hmm. If you're doing it at work, it's $20 per person. But if you're doing it at church, you're doing it with your neighbors, you're doing it with your family, it's free of charge.
Yeah.
Like
we should say that this is worth like $200, and it really is. I mean, you get it.
It's really high quality, and it's I've seen it, super high quality, and like this is not, and there's not a bait and switch. There's not a like, okay, you watch this and then you're gonna get the the hard ask at the end, to make Fred rich.
Is there a chance that people can buy better cleaning supplies in a process where they can then sell those cleaning supplies to other members of the group? And when they get people to sell the cleaning supplies, everybody wins? Is there any chance that...
No.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Pillows and pillows. No.
But there's no multi-level marketing that comes in session.
No, I'm not clever enough for it.
3.5.
I'm not clever enough for it.
Hey, what are the chances, Fred, that somebody who's a little less trusting would want to sign up to host, and then would say, I really want to watch the 3 documentaries first before I invite people. Do you encourage that? Do you allow that? What are your
So we
thoughts?
don't encourage it. We say, like, watch it as a group, because the risk is just, you watch it on your own. But if you're clear that you watch it, you just want to see it in order for people, there is actually sort of a little preview feature at the moment where you sign up your group. You can click like, hey, I actually just want to have a sneak preview. And then you can actually see the page that you land on with the films, and you can start watching and see, the films that they're high quality. So you can use that sort of preview feature to
Beautiful.
just feel comfortable about it, which I get. Like, I get, when I invite friends, like, I prefer to be sure that this thing is high quality. What a lot of people do is that they watch it the first time with a group, and then they're so moved that they say, like, okay, now part of the things that I want to do is spread this thing. And so, I did it with my little church group, but now let's try to spread it, in the church, or like people in the workplace, like, another interesting thing is people like watch it at home and then say like, oh, I want to bring this,
Sure.
watch it with colleagues, or the other way around.
Fred, I think about people in this dilemma too. I've started playing music at these open mic nights, and I was talking to somebody at an open mic, and he said, well, I like to play over at this other one as well, and they do a featured artist thing, but you have to guarantee that you'll have 15 people that will show up if you're the featured artist to sort of watch. And he looked and said, he's a little older than I am, so he's probably early 60s, and he said, I don't have 15 friends. just honestly, like, that's the problem. It is really true. A lot of people don't have friends that they would be like, I don't know. I don't know who would do this or that. Do you do anything to encourage people to say, like, I don't know, put something out with non-friends on Facebook, or in a Craigslist ad or something? Or do you really think, no, let this be in a relational network? Do you have any thoughts about that for people who are thinking about wanting to do this online or elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, if you have a group that is an obvious group to do it with, then that's what we encouraged you to do. That just makes a lot of sense. But otherwise, yeah, we have people who've posted something on Facebook or on LinkedIn. Or just like, I want to do this, and here are 3 dates, and who wants to join me? And so people have done it, and it works. Again, or sometimes you do it,
Rob, this has me thinking we should just do one of these Vote Common Goodwise. Like, Fred, do you have a suggestion of how many people are good to have in an online group? Like, is there a number you think works, or does it just break people into groups by 5 people in a discussion?
There's actually something powerful about this being a very large group. So we've had groups, like, I think the largest we've had so far is like 400 people. And then you break them out into subgroups, for the conversation. But there is something powerful when you start this thing and you see that there's lots of people, and you just know, like, hey, wow, lots of people are going through the same experience that I am watching the film and breaking out into subgroups. So you can, there's no limit.
We should totally do that.
Yeah.
Oh, great. See, this was just going to be a good conversation, Fred. You said you didn't have any agenda. Now I got 3 things to go do out of this. This is how people like you work. You're sneaky. You're sneaky like that. You're like, hey, I'm not here to sell you anything, but take a bite of this chocolate and see if you want to bring the bar home with you. Well done. I see that magic trick.
Yeah. Fred, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. And thank you for
one last thing before Rob does the right thing to land this plane. I've never seen a website that is, the week.ooo.
Oh, yeah.
People always ask.
Exempic, I think, is what comes to mind.
You know what?
What is OOO?
It was just one of those things that was created to create additional domain names, so it doesn't have actually any significance. And I just liked it because, .com, we're not a company, right? We're a nonprofit. But .org sounds like we're like, I don't know,
agenda, totally.
Agenda or something. Like what is the domain name for like ordinary people that do stuff for other ordinary people? Like, it didn't really exist. And I just thought like was easy and memorable and weird, and people ask about it, and so they remember it. And
I like it. Yeah.
And it was pretty cheap because nobody is taking the OOOs. Like the .org was available, but it was really expensive. So there you have
the week.oo.
Yeah, the place to go is the week.ooo. Yeah.
The week.
Yeah, Fred,
If someone
thank you
goes
so
to
much.
theweek.com, what do they run into if they go to theweek.net.org?
It's actually a magazine. It's like a newspaper,
Okay.
like sort of time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Fred, thank you for spending some time with us. Thank you for this really great work in the world. And thank you for sharing your own journey. And we have a little phrase we like to use around Vote Common Good where we encourage people to be the one who will go first. And I feel like you and Helene went first, and that gives permission for other people to join the journey too. And so thank you for that.
Thank you. This was really fun.
Gift to going first. We accept that gift. Hey, and do all you can, all y'all, to take care of each other and vote common good. And may your days get brighter. It's a solstice joke. Okay. Thanks, Fred. Thanks, everybody. I see y'all in the chat. And if you're still around, Paul Peters, I see you. So thanks for all your contributions in the chat, y'all. And we will talk to you soon. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year's. Happy solstice. Happy Hanukkah. Happy days. Happy New Year.